meeting. Please can I remind members to switch their microphone on when speaking and to turn it off when they have finished speaking. Can I also please remind members to put their mobile phones on silent, or maybe even better still, switch it off. Moving on to the agenda straight away. Item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of October 2017. Just go through very quickly for correctness because sometimes mistakes are made. But page 3, page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. I take it no issues there. I haven't been notified of any items as urgent. Declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do we have any? We have to stand in one of you, Majula, and we have to stand in one for you, Robert, too.
Majula just wants to clarify something on her declaration.
Sorry?
Manjula wants to clarify something on her
Oh, you want to clarify something? Sorry, Manjula.
Thank you, Chair. I said just a small amendment. I'm not a chair of Council Affairs now. I'm a board member.
Okay.
Thank you.
And that will be noted for to roll on to future meetings that you're just a board member. So thanks for that. We have then public question time here. Seems to be disjoint here, but never mind. We did receive a question from Councillor Stephen Correll regarding demand management and the Braunston Blues project. Now, panel members, you should all have a copy of the answer from the PCC in front of you, so I will not be reading it out. Councillor Correll, Steve, you have the option to ask a supplementary question for the purpose of clarifying any points on the answer. But to remind you, the PCC can answer immediately, of course, but otherwise he has, I believe it's 10 working days to get back to you. So, do you want to ask a supplementary? You do. Yep.
Please, Chair, just a very brief one. Can I thank Lord Back for his written response? His comments are exceptionally welcomed. It's reassuring to see that the Braunston Blues are held in such high regard. My supplementary question, as you might expect, is given the dire financial straits our country's in, could I ask you to bear in mind the excellent and well-documented outcomes of the Braunston Blues when it comes to the funding decisions in the future, as this joint agency actually saves the emergency money by their very existence?
Thank Councillor Correll for his for his original question and for his supplementary question. Yes, of course, we'll bear that in mind. He'll understand, as the panel I'm sure does, that we have some difficult decisions to take in the next few months. Quite a lot depends on what happens in the next week or two in relation to the settlement. But we too believe that Braunston Blues has been a success in its first couple of years. And while we can't guarantee or promise huge investment in it, we just can't do that now. It would be irresponsible to do that. We are sympathetic, of course, to what it's trying to do and what it has achieved so far.
Thank you. Will you be putting that in writing at all, Lord Bark, or are you Stephen? Are you happy with that answer? Okay. But thank you very much.
Chair, can I just add a brief? Is that okay? Firstly, can I apologise?
I didn't know where the voice was coming from then.
Disembodied. Sorry, Chair. Firstly, I was sorry I was slightly tardy, but there was a slight problem, and so sorry about that. It's hopefully sorted now. The other thing that members might note, the Strategic Partnership Board has received various presentations about Braunston Blues and is engaged in trying to understand how it could or couldn't spread it and what's affordable and what isn't. So it might be that members could look to there for that. I mean, particularly health seem to benefit quite a lot from the arrangements as they are, and health around that table as well. So that's a key part of the Strategic Partnership Board agenda, has been for the last couple of meetings, and I'm sure we'll be ahead. I'm sure your representatives immediately bring back details of the meetings, Chair.
Yeah, sorry about that. Getting told off there, Simon. Yeah. Now we're moving on. Item 5. Update on actions taken in response to the HMIC report, Leicestershire Police Crime Data Integrity Inspection 2017. To remind you, it's on page 15 and 16. You do have a report from the OPCC in your pack regarding the, I'm just going to say HMIC if that's okay. Yeah, HMIC report on crime data integrity. OPCC were also asked to provide a report for this meeting on a later HMIC report on the efficiency of Leicestershire Police. However, I understand this report will instead be provided for the panel meeting on the 31st of January. So, Lord Bart, would you like to present a report on the crime data integrity, and maybe you can give a verbal response on the efficiency of Leicestershire Police as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can. Dealing with crime data integrity. First, there's a short report in the name of Detective Superintendent Johnny Starbuck. We discussed this matter at the last panel meeting at some length, and Assistant Chief Constable Rob Nixon accompanied me then. I don't think you were here on that occasion, Chairman, but other members will recall that. We had quite a discussion about it, if I remember rightly. And here, I think Detective Superintendent Starbuck has set out what the force is doing around that particular report. There's not much else I want to add to that report, actually. I want to move on, if I may, to the police efficiency report that was reported on, published on the 9th of November. I don't know whether the Chief wants to say anything at this stage about the crime data integrity report.
I guess the only thing I'd want to say is, we take it seriously. There's quite a lively debate going on with policing about the standard the audit seeks you to achieve, and we are now joined by another force who've also been similarly rated to us, which was Lancashire, who have been similarly assessed. And when we get to item 7, you can see the consequences of some of the things that we've been doing, because what we're starting to see is more recorded crime. Part of the driving factor in that is because we're looking very hard at the data that's within our systems, as the HMI's asked us to do. We will be re-inspected by the HMI. Can't confirm the date, probably in the next 6 months or so, but date still be confirmed. It could be a month or two either side of that.
Of course, I'll take questions or comments at the end, if that's all right. If that's all right with you, Chairman. I'll move on, if I may, to the HMIC Peel Police Efficiency, including Leadership 2017 report. This is the first Peel assessment this year. The next one on legitimacy is due out on the 12th of December, and I ask all members of the panel to watch for that report with some interest and care. So, given the short time that's elapsed since the efficiency report was published, can I, and I don't want to take up too much time, provide the panel today with an overview of the current position with regards to that report, and an assurance that the panel will be kept updated throughout the course of the year via the performance reports you receive as part of the normal scrutiny arrangements. So the most recent report assesses the efficiency with which the force keeps people safe and reduces crime, and it stated that at the time of the inspection, and I absolutely underline that phrase, the force requires improvement. In my view, these overall conclusions, which are disappointing, do mask the very many positive findings included in the report. The Inspectorate acknowledges the work underway to address the weaknesses identified, which actually makes the overall grading rather frustrating. I'm going to quote from Her Majesty's Inspector Zoe Billingham. She publicly stated, and I quote, that Leicestershire Police is working hard to improve its efficiency. I am encouraged that the force has recognised that its organisational structure is causing some inefficiencies. Its extensive change programme is designed to address this, through a reorganisation of its workforce and considerable changes in how incidents and investigations are managed. I'm encouraged that the force is also improving how it manages hidden demand. The Inspector Zoe Billingham went on, the force has a sound understanding of the operational skills of its officers and staff, although more could be done to further encourage talented people within its workforce through more formal development schemes. I'm pleased that the force works in close and strong collaboration with neighbouring police forces across the region and works well with other local agencies like local councils and other emergency services. The force has rolled out mobile devices to all frontline officers and staff. This initiative will help to improve the efficiency of the workforce and support the provision of a better service to the public. And she finishes, the force's finances are stable and it has consistently met savings targets. The force will need to plan carefully to achieve a sustainable financial position for the future while meeting increasing demand. I'm confident, she says, that the Chief Constable and his Chief Officer team will continue to move the force in the right direction over the coming year. End of quote. As far as I'm concerned, I know, of course, that the force had already recognised that changes were required, particularly in the way calls for assistance made to the 101 non-emergency number are handled. It's best perhaps described as unlucky, I think I'd use a stronger expression, that the inspection took place during an exceptional month for 101 call handling performance. And I'm going to do something which for me is extremely unusual. I'm going to show, if I may, Chairman, 3 slides that relate to this matter. So, we were visited and inspected in June of this year, and that's really important. The first slide, thank you, Ewan. The first slide shows the 101, that's a non-emergency calls answered within 30 seconds. And you can see that from April, where it was low ebb, up to November, that figure has shot up to 85%. If everyone's had a chance to see, you can see 83.5% for November on the left-hand side. So huge improvement there. As you'll see also, let me turn then to the abandonment rate. And could I have the third one next? It's probably I've misled you. Yes, that's the one I wanted. So if you look at that, you will see, now I can find my place. Yeah. You will see that in June of this year, the abandonment rate was above 20% for 101 calls. Abandonment means that the caller puts down the phone, and without having received a response. Although, of course, I'd like members just to remember that they hear first of all a message from the Chief Constable himself, which tells them about other ways that they're able to contact the police rather than through a call. And they're also reminded that they can use online measures as well to get in touch with the police. So that's, having heard that, some members of the public will put the phone down there and then. But in June of this year, it was the month where there was enormous and quite sudden demand on the 999 calls to begin with, which always take precedence, of course. And that flows in, if 999s are very high, to 101s being more slowly answered than they would otherwise be. So you will see that figure in June. Already there were plans for changes in CMD. I think we've discussed that before the panel before. And I'll ask members to look at the graph and see how that abandonment rate has come way down right through August 1917, up a bit in September, again a month of very high demand, right down to November 17. So instead of it being 20% plus, it is here less than 5% at the present time. And if we just look at the third and final, rather busy graph, but you'll see what I mean. I wanted to bring, Chairman, the panel up to date as much as I could. That's the month of November. So you will see day by day the abandonment rate. So look at it there. You will see that on the 30th of November, actually, 1.5. And I don't claim for a moment that's going to be the average abandonment rate. But, I mean, that is a fantastic figure. And particularly when you compare it to the figure in June, which was rather unfortunately the actual month when the HMIC visited us, and which they decided, in their wisdom, to put in the report. So there you will see that although there are ups and downs, never higher than 10%, and the average is about 4 or 5% at the most. That, I think, shows a huge effort that's been made to improve the whole process. Our problem is this, that the report was in June. The inspectors came in June, they reported in November, by which time their findings were completely wrong and out of date. And we are stuck in the report with that 23% figure that is actually utterly unrealistic. We are much, much better than that. Now, I've stressed this point because it's one I feel personally quite deeply. The HMIC reports are read and looked at by government ministers, are looked at around by journalists, quite rightly, and quoted. That's fine when they give a true representation, but actually this isn't a true representation of where the 101 system is at the present time. And it may be the Chief will be able to say something a bit more about that when he deals with the performance report a bit later on. I've been very involved since I became Chief Police and Crime Commissioner with trying to improve 101, and I'm convinced that it is improving fast. I see the superintendent who was put in charge of it a few months ago every month, and he tells me the figures and tells me what changes are taking place, and they are impressive. Can I move on to just talk about Operation Darwin, which of course was in the process of being developed at the time that HMIC visited us. Report acknowledges that changes under Darwin are already underway. It's right I report, I think, and receive very regular updates on the progress in meeting the report's recommendations from the Chief, which is already underway. I've been to see Darwin myself in operation. I went to Market Harbour on the day that the investigators went to Market Harbour in November, and I was reassured by what I found. As the panel knows, Darwin is intended to improve the force's ability to answer non-emergency 101 calls more swiftly, to enable officers to spend more and more time on frontline duties through the use of what are called mobile data projects. Those are use of new technology, and to localise its investigative approach by decentralising management away from force headquarters and investigation of crime, and placing resources where they're most needed, and that includes response resources as well. The report suggests, that's the HMIC report, that Darwin was already helping to reduce the number of non-emergency 101 telephone calls which are abandoned. It also notes that the Darwin programme is introducing changes to how the force manages incidents and investigations, not least by introducing what are called neighbourhood investigation teams, neighbourhood investigation units, NIUs. Now, can I update the committee on the panel on this? On the 23rd of October last, the neighbourhood investigation units went live with investigative capabilities at 8 locations around the force area. 3 in the city, Euston Street, Keam Lane and Beaumont Leys, then Market Harborough, where it had not been for a number of years, Melton Mowbray, Hinckley, Loughborough and Colville. Then only last week, the 24th, last week, 24/7 response teams began operating from Loughborough, Beaumont Leys, Braunston, Mansfield House, Euston Street, Hinckley, Keam Lane and Melton Mowbray. These are the practical ways in which Darwin has decentralised the services that the police provide and are extremely welcome to me, and I hope will be to the panel as well. I should just say the missing persons team has gone live working from Wigston. That team will be expected to lessen the demand caused by missing from home individuals. You know, the panel knows how much time, police time and effort and expense is spent looking for missing persons, many of them young, often very vulnerable young people. The report recognised, that's the HMIC report that I'm speaking to, that the force is investing in new technology, the force is developing new systems to access services, such as the digital desk. I want to just remind the panel before I finish that the force estimates that some 60% of all calls for service do not relate to a crime, adeptly illustrating that so much demand isn't created by crime, but frankly by vulnerability and by lack of alternative services, by public safety issues and so on. The College of Policing highlights the increasing strain placed on the police by public safety and welfare activities, including missing persons, animal welfare, crowd control, and not least road traffic incidents. It's a long list, which I believe is made worse by the age of austerity in which we're all living at the moment. So I was pleased to see the inspectors in this report note that Leicestershire Police is heavily committed, that's a quote, to collaborative working with other forces in the East Midlands. Talks also about some of the more vulnerable in society in the Braunston Blues project in particular. The report comments that the force is, quote, sensitive to the needs of the community it serves and works to understand what matters to local people, is taking a progressive approach to tackling cybercrime, and highlights evidence that the force understands the less obvious and more complex demands, fairly new demands like human trafficking, online crime and honour-based violence. I have to say, and I know I've banged on quite a long time in doing my report on this, that I was disappointed that despite all the positivity that the inspectors found, the report still concludes that the force requires improvement. It reflects, I repeat, a snapshot in time, and the work to redress the situation was in play when they arrived and is much more in play now. But, and I finish with this, it's a big but, you have to take into account that this force is continuing to deliver a quality policing service, a more complex one all the time, in the face of ongoing cuts. So we're asked to do more with less. The report supports that proposition because it talks about the policing budget reducing and officers and staff experiencing growing workloads and an increasingly complicated job, and the 60% of all calls that have nothing to do, that don't relate to a crime. So I think that's probably more than enough from me. Just to tell you that the Chief Constable and I have spoken on many occasions about this report and others too, and continue to do so. There's a robust programme of scrutiny from my office, as well as I know the Chief Officer's team are looking all the time at this. It would help that considerably if those currently bashing a calculator to allocate the police grant, which we're expecting, of course, early next week, could do so with a slightly more generous approach. we will all see next week whether that plea has any effect at all. But thank you, Chairman, for letting me go on about this important report. I know the panel wanted to hear about it, and I've tried to explain to the panel the background to it. And of course, I'm happy, and I know the Chief is happy to answer any comments or questions you or the panel may have.
Thank you, Lord Bark. First of all, I do have a comment, mainly for information, really, then there will be a question from me. The comment is this, that on the HMIC reports, a report is issued, and the police and crime panel know nothing about it. And then I get a phone call from the local media, what do you think to this, what do you think to that? Why are you asking? Well, there's an HMIC report out. Didn't you know? No, we didn't know. No one tells us anything. So because of that, I've written a letter to Zoe Billingham asking, could we at least have 24 hours notification of the report? So around 6 weeks went by, wasn't it? And we got a hard copy letter in return. And basically, it was a very, very long letter, but she just didn't answer the question whatsoever. So we've gone back to her again, asking a simple question. Can we please have a report at least 24 hours before the embargo is taken off? So when the local media do get in touch with myself, I can make a comment. I do feel very hamstrung. I think it's very ungenerous of Zoe Billingham not to allow this, to be honest, at this time. And any way you can give to help us on that would be beneficial. I think you have something to say, Lord Park.
Yes, the 24 hours rings a bell with us because we get the final report 24 hours before, if we're lucky, 24 hours before it's actually published. But what we promise to do is to make sure that we put it in the post to you, perhaps even using modern technology, so that you get it literally an hour or so after we get it.
I can guarantee you, Lord Bark, if you put it in the post to Old Dolby, we will get it 2 days after the embargo's lifted.
Yeah, but that's better than 6 weeks, Chairman, isn't it?
Yeah. No, obviously we accept that offer. Thank you very, very much.
The
Simon.
Chief, I think, has a feeling about this.
Just as an example, I mean, the rationale from the HMIC FRS, as we now like to call them, is that it would give any of us an unfair advantage to get advance notice of what the reports say. The reality then, and what that means is, I have seen a draft of the legitimacy report, which is to be published next Tuesday, as I understand it. It was originally, I think, going to be later this week. I have had the opportunity to comment on its factual accuracy. I will next see whether any of my comments or thoughts have been regarded as pearls of wisdom or a load of nonsense 24 hours before the report is published. So I will not see that again, and Lord Bart won't see it again as PCC until 24 hours before it comes out. In fact, we don't get it much before the media, who are, of course, splendid people if they're reporting me from the back of the room, and we value the transparency that they bring. But, you know, I think it is an issue, because to receive a document of that length and importance, you know, and there is a process of fact-checking, which is really important, and I think I would respect the fact that that's there. It is an issue, and I would have thought you should be getting it at the same time as we do, or at least a notice of when it is being put on a website, because you're also part of the accountability mechanism.
The last time it happened, Dan Martin had to send it to me, so...
He probably knows what it says anyway.
My question is this, though. The abandonment rate of phone calls, Lord Bart, obviously very impressive and certainly a very good graph to follow. Do you have any information on the level of calls? I mean, did the level of calls, incoming calls, remain exactly the same, static? Or did they go down, or did they even go up?
The number of calls have, I think, on the whole, I'm not saying this happens every day, but the demand has shot up over the course of the summer and still remains at a very high level. I believe that on 31st of October, which is an exceptional day, of course, anyway, the highest number of calls that there had been for 4 years. And I believe the demand is still very, 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 very high, and much higher than it was, for example, 12 months ago. And that's true about 999 calls, as it is about 101 calls too. But we will try and, if we may, I think maybe something in the it's in the performance report. It's in the performance report. So perhaps we can deal with that when we come to the performance report.
Members, we have Helen waiting to answer a question.
Thank you, Chair. I've looked at some of the papers a bit further on because it kind of covers the issue. So it's actually the next agenda item, but it's right to bring it here. There's definitely some seasonal trends that you see in terms of around the April to July spikes, although you go from somewhere back in 2013 where it's around 5% it peaks. Obviously, this year it's much higher, around nearly 25%. So in terms of calls, when I look at that as well, there are some spikes within that. So there's a seasonal pattern by the looks of it. Is that the case? Is it, and a note in the next paper on page 21, there is talk about the fact that was something to do with the call centre and the staffing, but in terms of, is it around annual leave time? Is it around the fact that it's lighter nights, therefore more calls are made around around antisocial behaviour? That's one question around what's actually happening in there. Is this something that can be addressed in terms of making sure we've got the right bums on the seats for those periods of time? The other thing is around, for you, Lord, in terms of the strategic work with partners, around the fact that if people are calling you, I say you, not you personally, calling the police force, Simon's force, in terms of the issues that they have that are non-emergency or therefore not for the police, is there something that needs to be done around public messages around where they should go? Very similar to what you see now with NHS, which is where you see a line of people stood waiting at an A&E department, and it actually shows you where the person should have gone to, rather than standing in an A&E queue, as it were. It's quite a visual thing you see in doctor surgeries. But around messages to send out to people that if this is what's happening, you need to contact this number, etc. I think there needs to be something where, with partners, you do something. If it's the wrong place to go to, 101, where do they go to, and letting the public know? Does that make sense?
Your question's in two parts. Can I ask the Chief whether he might deal with the first part, is the one that relates to the performance, and then I'll come back, if I may, on the strategic question. I have something to say on that.
Okay, I mean, what happened in the summer? We needed some more bums on seats. We've gone through a pretty vigorous recruitment process, training people up to getting to the point where they can kind of fly solo on a desk, which gets all sorts of complicated stuff through, takes a bit of time. If we could live last year again, we'd have started some of that recruiting a bit earlier, but hindsight is the only exact science. I think the other thing that happened very specifically was our nines volume, and we weren't alone in this. This was a national trend. Our nines volume just went up and up and up compared to previous months. And we found, therefore, that the nines calls get prioritised, which is quite right. We do have, if I call them tidal shift patterns, we have shift patterns that link into peaks and troughs. Within that, in June, there were 6 days where we had more calls in than we have on New Year's Eve. And usually at the end of the year, we sit down and say that Halloween and New Year's Eve were the 2 busiest days of the year. That hasn't proved to be the case this year in terms of call volume. And then the second part, we're getting some new telephony equipment, which we think will help do some of that routing better. I know that people listen to the message on the front of 101 with me on it because they always tell me, not always in the most flattering of terms. How many times have I got to listen to you say that? That offers you the chance to look at Ask the Police for where else can you get information? We've been talking through Strategic Partnership Board with health colleagues because they've now got some extra capability around 111 and what that can offer. I think there's also a thing for us in terms of the calls that we're getting in about risk appetite. We do find it quite hard to just say, I'm really sorry, that's not for us, which we need to get a bit better at. So there's some stuff around people, there's some stuff around plotting when those people are at work, there's some stuff about how we link in with partners. There's been some work done about sort of, if I call them crisis days, so with the Local Resilience Forum. So, for instance, there were those days when it was really, really windy. We were getting deluged with calls, fire were getting deluged with calls, and we were finding some partners, weren't available to take calls, so people had decided to call us. And so there's some learning there for all of us around demand management. But, your points are all well made. I think they're catered for. And, of course, the other sort of brutal reality of this is the easy answer would be to put more people in to answer the calls. but they've got to come from somewhere else. So there's something about us continually tuning the organisation and offering, and it's within the later paper, things like online reporting as an option, where we've started to see some reasonable take-up of that, and we think that that will just lift and lift. So, I mean, I kind of agree with your start point. We've done lots of work around tidal patterns, work patterns, peaks and troughs, and there's also a real focus on it. I mean, the Chair's question about data, we've got data coming out of our ears about this stuff, Joe. I mean, yeah, I'm tempted to invite you to come and sit and read some of it for an hour.
On the strategic issue, which I think the Chief's just touched upon, it's been something I've been really strong about, I hope, since I took over, which is I don't think, well, given technology and the need for us partners to work more closely together, that the present system around call centres is satisfactory. In other words, we ought to be able to pass on more easily the issues that people raise to the people who can actually help them. 101's a very well-known number now. People ring it for all kinds of reasons, as we've said. And what we ought to be working towards, and this is with our friends, County Council and the City Council and Rutland too, is a system whereby one way of doing it is to try and get somebody into the call centre, for example, from mental health or someone from the local authority, to whom easily enough a call could be passed on. Another way of it is to try and do it through technology. What is the worst possible thing, though, is to ring up a number, find that they can't help you but put you on to somebody else, then you have to put the phone down, ring somebody else. And frankly, it's true to say that a lot of us, and particularly those people who are particularly vulnerable, do find it difficult to be phoning 4 or 5 numbers. So we have to, I think, try and talk about this and rationalise it. It's one of the things I'm hoping we'll be doing at the SPB when we're looking at demand. I've got a bit of money set aside, which was set aside when I came in order to try and move the strategic issue further forward. But it is a difficult time. The local authorities don't want to be landed, frankly, with a load of more people to have to help, because they're already, I think, extremely full of... they're finding great difficulty with the cuts they've had in order to help those who already get through to them. So it is an issue, but I think we could be much more grown up, much more modern about the way that we deal with people who need help. That's my answer to your query.
Thank you very much, both of you, for your answers. There's something wider here around like a triage type way of looking at things. People known to you are known to other services, and so it's about how we can work with them, because I know certainly vulnerable people, and I work with a number of them, are known to both police, they're known to mental health services, they're known to the local authority, etc. And it is almost that we're losing that intelligence on those people. I mean, you'll have to watch things like 999, what's your emergency type things. There are some people that ring every day, and I'm sure that you could say that there's similar people in your own area. One of the things I don't know if you're aware of that's come to light for me is through the mental health services around the crisis team. And actually there's a real issue now that people can't self-refer, and I might be wrong and I'm happy to be corrected, but I spoke to somebody this week who is somebody that was in near crisis, who was told the only way they could contact the crisis team was go through a GP referral. In the middle of the night, when that person's having crisis, who are they going to call? They're going to call 999, aren't they? Or somebody's going to call 999, not 101. They're going to call emergency services, perhaps, for that person at that point. And I think my point is more around, it's not just the local authorities. There is a much wider issue here where some partner makes a decision about something that they're going to stop because of their own issues around austerity, for example. It's having a knock-on impact to another service. And so actually what is happening is it's not a very joined-up way of working. And as a person who pays the taxes looks at that and thinks, hang on a minute, it's just playing the game of frogs where actually somebody else is popping up and there's another bill somewhere else. So it needs to be that wider discussion, doesn't it, in terms of it. I can see Simon's nodding away there. But there's definitely an impact, I think, on your services, even just using mental health as an example, by that decision that's been made.
If there's one thing that the Chief Constable tells me on a very, very regular basis, it's about how the police do take on many, many occasions the hit, as it were, for other organisations, institutions that either can't, for various reasons, or won't.
Chair?
Mental health is among those.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points. I mean, there was a reason when 101 was originally set up. It was a partnership arrangement, and many of you in the room will remember that. It was a partnership line, as I understand it. It was before I was here. It wasn't uniform across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. It was just in certain areas, but certainly where I was at the time, it was a partnership. That was the original arrangement. And then when the central funding went, people withdrew from that arrangement, and, hindsight's an exact science, isn't it? I've said that once already. The second point, which might cheer you all up, is exactly the point that Helen has been made, has been picked up at the Strategic Partnership Board, that we had the last meeting shared with each other our repeat locations and our repeat callers. And at that time, our winning repeat caller was somebody who called us 177 times so far this year, and had not reported any matters that were for the police. So there's a whole set of things there about how you can help and support those people. And people like Jane Moore from the County Council, people from the City and Rutland, and some police officers, and I understand LPT and the Hospital Trust all attended. I'm told the CCGs weren't able to attend, have done a bit of sharing of what are the locations and who are the people who call us, and what is their need, and how between us can we get upstream and give them better support and help for exactly the reasons Helen just described. So that piece of work is up, ongoing, pretty vibrant. That nice Mr. Nixon is driving it, which for any of you who've ever worked with Mr. Nixon means there's a sort of bulldozer heading your way if you haven't headed and done any of your actions.
Thank you, Simon Willie. Alan?
I guess I just need a bit of clarification. When you're saying a call's been abandoned, is that somebody that's not got through your message and decided to put the phone down? To me, that's potentially. Or have they got through and waited for the phone to ring and put the phone? There's two differences there. So that you've got your figures on this, obviously.
I just want to be really clear. We take this report on the chin and we're going to do stuff about it. It can be somebody who's waited for 2 minutes,
okay,
or it can be somebody who's waited for 3 seconds. Not literally long enough. In the control room, the phone will have rung once and gone dead. You've got no chance of answering it.
Okay.
So hidden within that, there is quite a set of things.
Okay.
And the other thing as well, of course, for us, we get a measure of hoax calls as well, and there's loads of research that says if you let a hoaxer's call, if you don't answer it before 5 seconds, they're more likely to bottle it and hang up. So there's all sorts of stuff going on. Bottom line is 20% isn't the place we want to be. It's not a place where we are most days. But you're absolutely right. There's all sorts in there. People having second thoughts, people who give up, whatever. All I would say is I phoned a well-known national company last week, and after 3 days I gave up. So I kind of look, and if any of them want any advice from us on how to answer calls, we're available to do that.
It's just quite complex. I mean, the call centres, I've got different terms because I've actually been involved with one in Australia. We call them failed responses, etc. What we discovered, it's not putting through to some with expertise. Normally you've discovered that's 1 or 2% of your calls. Most of your calls you can handle. It's your frontline staff, if they're resourced, and we're finding that they can answer immediately. You give them briefings, they're well trained. What you've got to be careful of is you go into these call centres, you've got a big sign there, it's been answered in 10 seconds, but the response isn't good. The quality response isn't good, and therefore these people will phone back. So we call these failed responses. More people phone back, you put more staff on to answer the phone. Costs you more money. So your resources, what we discovered by resourcing your front line for 95% of the calls that you know about, and also you can profile, is exactly what you're saying there, the ones that call regular, that'll give you plenty of time for that couple of percent that really need the expertise advice. That, to me, that's call centres. But it is a minefield.
I absolutely agree with everything you've just said. And that is how we are trying to work and resource.
Yeah.
We're doing a load of analysis around, what's failure demand, what's demand that we're causing, what of our calls is PC blogs at Melton phoning to try and find the number of PC Smith, and it's not a huge number, but you just need to eliminate all of that. But absolutely with you all the way.
Okay, John.
Thank you. I'm obviously in a bad mood because I've been looking at the data, and the honest truth is, if you look on page 21, the abandonment rate of calls went well above 15% starting in January. So actually, by June, yes, it was over 20, but your problem started much earlier. And frankly, that's a supply side problem, which I presume you've addressed. That's not a demand problem, that was a supply side problem.
It's a point well made. My point is that the HMIC came in June when it was at its very, very top. But there clearly were things not right about CMD. We discussed them at the panel, I think, during the course of the last year and a half. Things were going wrong then, and it was June when things got as bad as they did. But you're right, the figures did shoot up in those months, April, May, and June. It's true.
And Chair, just quick, to be fair, the slide reflected that. Bums on seats was the issue. And the only thing I would say is when I used to get 85% at school, I used to get an extra donut off my mum. So, there is a thing here as well. 85% is okay. It's not as good as we want it to be.
Okay, members, are there any further questions for Lord Warwick on item 5? If not, I ask you, Jonathan.
One final question. When are you expecting the reassessment?
I'll try and be quick. As we currently understand it, the PEEL, which is the Police Efficiency, Effectiveness and Legitimacy inspections, are being suspended for a year to enable forces to complete force management statements, which will describe how we will manage all sorts of aspects of policing. The consultation document's 97 pages long. Therefore, we don't believe, as we're currently sat here, that we will be reassessed till the year after next. So the annual assessment process is being suspended for a year to enable force management statements to shape forces' self-analysis of their goods and their not-so-goods, and then allow the HMI to inspect against risk.
So 2019?
Potentially, not until 2019, yeah. Which in a way is a shame, because I'm kind of convinced if they came back in tomorrow, I'm not sure they would come to the same overall conclusion. But it is what it is, and it's the same for all forces.
So if there's anything more frustrating than the fact that they came in June and didn't take real account of what happened afterwards, it is the fact that they will not be coming again next year to put it right if we deserve for it to be put right. That makes it even worse, in my view.
Thank you. Just working it out. Be about right for the next PCC to pick up then, will it?
I think no comment to that is probably appropriate.
Is that a recruiting
Although it is
drive?
2019, you don't get rid of me that quick, Joe. I've got
2020.
2020 is.
I must have been thinking of other elections. Okay, I ask you to note agenda item 5. Yep. Thank you. Moving on then to agenda item number 6. I understand this is a rollover from last meeting, sorry. Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, 6-month update. I had told you, I did hear somewhere that you're going to send you apologies because, number one, you were suffering from sleep deprivation. And then also on maternity leave as well. So congratulations for taking those two impacts on your lifestyle and turning up, Kirk. And also, more importantly, congratulations on your first daughter. Yeah, after 4 previous attempts. Yeah. Over to you, Kirk.
Using proper nappies or the cloth ones?
I've ruled my acting vice chair out of order on that one. Over to you, Kirk.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I am a bit sleep deprived at the minute. She's great, but she's demanding in the evenings. Just in regards to the 6-monthly update, I wasn't sure what format you kind of wanted this or how for me to present it, so I'm just going to give you some headlines around the themes of work that I've been undertaking over the period of time. Some of them, or two of them, we've discussed in quite detail already. Obviously, the HMIC plays a role in my day-to-day and liaising with the COT and the senior team in regards to their strategy and how we're going to address some of the areas of concerns through the legitimacy, efficiency and effectiveness of the Peel report. And going forward, the latest task in and around this is the force management statement, which Simon just mentioned. I was only in London yesterday with other PCCs nationally with Sir Tom Windsor, who's designed this new force management strategy, which is out for consultation until the 22nd of December, which won't replace the Peel or the HMI inspection as we know it at this moment in time. It will kind of be a precursor for forces to assess where they think they are, and they will assess against that and then come and do inspections on the back of that. And it's a huge piece of work. I mean, Simon's got a couple of staff on this now, which is it's 97 pages in the consultation document alone. It could have its advantages, it could have its disadvantages. There's a mixed view on this nationally across PCCs and chiefs, I'm sure, but it's something that's going to happen, I'm sure, and we'll have to look at that going forward. There's also the police support groups that I link in with in regards to their roles and functions through staff and police officers and how they're being treated within the force. There's a comms and engagement part of the role, which is both the public and formal events and informal events. There's particular work themes around gold groups, around knife crime that we've picked up, or I've picked up in the past 6 months. And the knife crime gold group has been doing some excellent work across LLR. I'm pleased to report, which Rob Nixon was actioned to put in place and is now chaired by Shane O'Neill. And they're doing some work around educating young people, deterring young people, also doing some disrupt and targeting known offenders and people that the police and other services around this multi-agency approach of the knife crime group that meet on a regular basis to keep the data and information up to speed. There's also an equality and diversity strand. One of the things that's in the police and crime plan and threaded through the police and crime plan is equality and diversity. And one of the areas that we're going to look at is recruitment of ethnic minorities and BAM individuals in particular, both on police staff and police officer numbers. LLR's not bad in comparison to our other 43 forces. I think we're just under 10% at this moment in time, but it's a figure that we'd like to increase that's reflective of our LLR community and something that the COT are happy to take on, and we'll be working with the equality team to do that going forward. There's also the Youth Commission. The Youth Commission's back in place, and we've designed a work programme around the Youth Commission that will be looking at a range of different things going forward. So ways to engage with new members of communities, more young people, more ways in which we can engage with young people through social media, which we don't do very well ourselves at this moment in time, changing the format and principles around which young people want to engage with us, so inviting them to meetings. Willie just took some members of the Youth Commission to the event at Victoria Park, the parade. They've been out to the What Matters to You, to Remembrance Sunday. They've been out to the What Matters to You event, where they've met members of the community and heard firsthand the concerns of members of the community, with the chief present as well, which has been really good. So we're working with the Youth Commission about some different strands of work going forward for the next year. There's also the estate stuff and the estate strategy, looking at the modelling and profile of policing going forward, which has linked into the Op Darwin work as well. Op Darwin's been a big piece of work that's rolled out now, looking at operational policing going forward. And I guess amongst all of that and on the back of that is the continuation of the day-to-day business like this, and the strategic assurance boards and SPBs and the exec boards and health and well-being and so on and so on. Just keeping the relationships, I guess, in and around LLR with the community, the voluntary sector, private organisations and also the local authorities. And I think I'd leave it there, Chair, and happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Kirk. I have certainly no questions. What I do have, though, is a comment. It's interesting to note, to me at least anyway, how your role has matured in a short period of time, that you've obviously been DPCC. So congratulations to you on that. Obviously, you've picked up the baton when it's given you and you ran with it, so well done on that. I got a feeling Lee wants to be leaving. He's got his briefcase wrapped up. Thank you very much, Lee. Pardon? Nick? Oh, yeah. Okay. Another one's been called up as well. Okay. Any questions?
I don't usually have that effect, Chair.
There's always a first. You will worry if one other does it. There's only one left who can do it, actually, but he's holding steady at the moment. Helen?
It's just a comment, really. I think it would have been useful. I know you've obviously been very busy with young child, to see something written beforehand as well, because obviously to take it in a verbal update is quite difficult to be able to then respond to that with questions. So I just think, given the fact that that's something that we really asked for, and there's been obviously a delay, that it would have been useful to see something in writing today.
Yeah, I'm sure Kirk's noted that. One thing you haven't got, I'm going to speak as Melton Mowbray, obviously the public meeting that you called, Lord Mark, at Melton Mowbray. Certainly the concerns of Melton residents has calmed down significantly since you came to Melton Mowbray, both of you.
That I suspect is coincidence rather than cause and effect. Yeah.
Just for members' information, I put something on Facebook on one Friday evening in August, Friday before August, bank holiday, I remember. I ended up with 538 comments. I thought it was going to go viral at one point in time, but hey ho, I survived. Sorry? John?
Thank you, Chair. Kirk, just one question. Just to get an idea of your more daily activity, you mentioned Op Darwin, which is obviously operational. How are you involved and at what level are you involved?
Thanks, John. I think for the Op Darwin, it was more around, from the police and crime plan's perspective, that Willie made a commitment to neighbourhood policing, and it was to ensure that through the Op Darwin modelling, the remodelling of operational policing, that the neighbourhood policing model wasn't lost, because from our time of engagement out in the districts and the county and Rutland, from members of the community and also elected members as well, is neighbourhood policing is paramount to the work that we do. So it was around, from our perspective, the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, to ensure that neighbourhood policing stayed as a principle to frontline policing through the remodelling of operational policing.
Fine, if I may, Chair. The question was, what specific role did you take? How did you get out on the ground? Did you go out and see the community, or did you go and see the police, or what?
Well, I would just feed back into the COT that would write up Op Darwin as an operational model of our concerns or our suggestions around what that model should look like from a community perspective, from an elected member perspective, from partnerships perspective, to ensure that all of those areas were covered. So I would engage with the team in and around the writing of the Op Darwin model going forward.
Any other comments? If not, thank you very much, Kurt. I would obviously have taken on board Helen's suggestion or even proposal, and so in 6 months' time, a short note would be beneficial to all. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7. So let me get this. I'm missing a deputy now. Anyway, it's performance reports, page 17 to 50. It's regular performance report. Obviously, Simon's here to help out on this one, as always, when it comes to performance. But over to you, PCC, to introduce it.
Well, if I may, Chair, cut matters short, I'm going to ask the Chief Constable if he will introduce this report.
Okay.
Obviously, I'll be happy to answer questions too at its conclusion.
Yep. Simon.
Shall I attempt it in chunks, Chair? Or shall I just go for it for 5 minutes and then we'll go where we want to?
what we'll do is go for it in 5 minutes,
Yeah.
and then I will go through it in sections for questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the first time that I think the panel's seen a report based on the new police and crime plan, which obviously came into place in April, and we'd done the first 2 quarters. I know the panel had asked for the first quarter, but it sort of seemed a bit strange sitting here thinking about what Christmas dinners we got this week, looking back to June. So we've got the first 2 quarters. You can see the recommendations. One is that you note the report and its appendix, and the second is I do think there's some things for perhaps partners to take from this in terms of data around call management. We've already alluded to what calls are going where, demand management, which Helen's taken us into as well, missing persons who often come from the same locations, licensing legislation when we get to the bit about that, and also around the commissioning of mental health services. The mental health legislation changes next week in relation to policing. So just quickly, the chart which takes on page 17 across into 18 takes the priorities outlined in the police and crime plan and then just describes what the data set that can, we think, help describe that is. Just for newer members, we have a pretty rigorous performance set of meetings and discussions, the key one of which is chaired by the deputy, but also within that there's crime and ops groups and the teams dealing with vulnerability, and there's a kind of daily, weekly, monthly setup going on. The first chunk of the report talks about recorded crime. 18 into 19 just puts some national context around it. So what we're seeing, the official crime statistic is the crime survey for England and Wales. What that says is that crime experienced by citizens is reducing, but that doesn't as yet include the fraud element. So the national context chunk there, we are not in a different place to other forces, which is we are finding that more and more crime is being reported to us at the moment, and the nationally described issues and concerns there we would echo. Willie's already alluded to some of the stuff around cyber and digital. The way we are recording has definitely had an impact, but also we're seeing genuine increases as well, particularly I would say around burglary and theft from vehicle, which are both things that we're working pretty hard on at the moment. And then we go into a section, call handling, which I think we've probably rehearsed the key chunks of. The only thing I would sort of say, which is covered towards the end of that, what calls become incidents. One of the reasons we've had to tweak our model is that we have a model which is designed to cope with 725, 750 incidents a day. It's been running well over 800 pretty regularly. So some of the moves that Willie described where we've pushed people out into response teams is about that. Incident response times, we continue to monitor how quickly and, of course, how safely we get there as well, which is another issue. One of the reasons that we've made some of the changes we made last Monday and pushed some of the responders out to more of our stage places like Melton and Harborough is just to try and reduce some of the distances that they've been travelling and, try and look at that time and bring that time down a bit. And then priority incidents, you can see as well there that that's just started to squeeze down again. So we monitor all this stuff all the time. The fundamental challenge for us is for this year, we've got about 1 million fewer police officer hours to deploy than we would have had half a dozen years ago. So in all of this stuff, we're trying to be really efficient. The next chunk, which starts at page 25, is around recorded crime. And the grid there, so the pretty coloured grid shows trends. So what's the mean? What's an exception? And you can see we're over the top with lots of that, which is a combination of actual increases, but also some of the recording. And then you can see the sort of grid of crime types halfway down that page. So the crime audit said we were under-recorded by just about 25%. We're currently seeing a recorded crime increase of 21.8%. So those sound reasonably in line to me. You can see again within that chart, and I'm sure different members will pick out different things, but particularly the continued impact of domestic abuse on what we're doing operationally and consequently on everyone else within those houses. And also in all of the increases, some of these are about police activity. So the drugs offences, the possession of weapon offences reflect the activities we've been taking because of concerns, and Kirk alluded to them, around things such as knife crime. So some of the operational activity around knife crime has had an impact. Over on to 26 into 27, graphs reflecting what's recorded. So total crime is heading into the 70,000s, sort of 76, 77,000 rolling 12-month figure in terms of recorded. And then you can see violence against the person going up. Again, with recorded crime, some of these increases are probably good news. You'll recall the previous PCC and this PCC have both been encouraging us to ensure reporting of things like domestic abuse and hate crime. And you can see some of that captured within here. Theft of motor vehicle, some sort of interesting developments there. Clearly some technological developments about people finding new ways of overcoming some of the vehicle security techniques. And then theft from motor vehicle, and particularly a real ongoing and very focused piece of work about theft of tools, which has become a significant problem for us and for those people whose tools have been taken. If I move through on to 29, you can see there, robbery from the person, still a relatively low occurrence thing compared to many other crime types, but just been up a little bit. And then hate crime, and you can see also there the sub groups within hate crime about what those hate crimes are. User satisfaction, pretty steadily above 70% for everything. We still have to survey that, and still do survey that, and still look at the kind of feedback loop from that. And then if I push on, Chair, because I must be pushing my 5 minutes, antisocial behaviour with some information there about levels of incident. So STORM is the command and control system that we use. Sentinel is the shared case management system that your antisocial behaviour workers will all have access to. And what should be happening is on Sentinel there should be the higher risk antisocial behaviour cases being managed. Domestic violence user surveying, some of the rules around that have changed, but we've recommenced that again, so the sample's quite small. Historically, that's something that we were one of the leading forces for doing, and it wasn't done by all forces. And you can see there the satisfaction level. Specialist support around all sorts of offences comes through the Commission Service of Victim Support. And then I'll sort of batter through this next bit, if I may. So numbers of special constables at a pretty healthy level, and they are pretty active. One of the main causes of them leaving is because we're doing a little bit of recruiting. Volunteering had dropped off a bit. We've run a campaign, and those numbers are changing, and there's a significant number of people to come in. And then you can see the data then around BME. And as Kirk's alluded to, I think we're actually got the third highest level nationally out of 43 forces for BME representation. Obviously, that's great. I'm proud of that. But actually, when you compare that to the population we're policing, we are still offbeat with that. One of the challenges for us is the peaks and troughs of recruiting over the next couple of years are likely to be that next year we recruit about 120, and then the following years it's likely to only be 20. So there's a kind of, I'm never good at sums, but there's a limit to how much we're going to impact on those percentages, given those potential recruiting numbers. The rank breakdown, I am now chairing a group looking at attraction and retention, particularly around BME candidates, because unless you've got people joining in the widest sense of joining the organisation, you won't have candidates for seniority. And obviously to join the senior team, you've got to have passed national courses, and you've got to have got through a thing called the Police National Assessment Centre. So significant piece of work there. Ironically, we've got less diverse over the last couple of years, and in fact Leicestershire County Council employed Chris Thomas when he left, and Steph Pandit, who people will remember. So we've, because of retirements, people who've come through the organisation, we've got less diverse. And then you can see there our staff have a higher level of BME representation. PCSOs, again, higher than for regular officers. Specials has just fallen off a bit. Volunteers has dropped off in line with the numbers, and hopefully will change as new people come through. And then cadets, where we are very well represented in terms of BME candidates and cadets. That might become really important because the proposal for next year is there are 3 routes in to join the police. One is you have a degree in policing and you apply for a job. Another is you have a degree in something and you do a conversion degree. And the third is you are an apprentice and you do a 3-year apprenticeship. And we're just looking at where we focus, drawing what might be quite a limited number of people onto those apprenticeships from. You can then see you've got the female staff breakdown, and as Kirk said, diversity is an important sort of theme all the way through the police and crime plan. We've got Julia Devenham currently who's acting as ACC, and some of you will have come across Julia on her way through the organisation in other roles, and then we repeat all the representation data across that I've just outlined, except for female candidates. And actually our cadets are over half are female. And then we move into some other bits of the plan which are completely different issues but link into what Alan said about call handling. So some of the people calling up are trying to get updates on their crime. Track My Crime should allow them to do that in a different way, which would hopefully mean they could do it at their convenience online. I do realise not everyone's online. Rate My Police, I think we reported on before. And then online crime reporting, which we've soft launched and deliberately done as a soft launch. But what we've seen is from having no reports at all, we're running pretty typically 150, 160 a month. We would see there to be some opportunities there to increase the level of reporting, and so we're going to be talking much more about that as an option because we've established that it works. You'll also see the kind of ratios of what is reported as a crime, which actually isn't technically a crime under the crime counting rules, and trust me, we've scrutinised that following the audit. The numbers of consultations and engagements by particularly neighbourhood teams are captured on page 44. And you can see they're significant and also consistent themes as to what are the problems in all sorts of communities that are in some ways very different, in some ways very similar, but traffic issues come up all the time. Antisocial behaviour comes up everywhere, and then some different stuff around drugs and alcohol. Missing persons, we've created a separate missing persons team because on a typical day we were using over 400 patrol hours a day looking for missing people, and some of that was about handing over cases. That's not the best way of us using our resources, and it's not the best way of us finding and supporting missing people, perhaps more importantly. There is a considerable level of repeat missingness, particularly from children, particularly from locations, and perhaps that's something that members of the panel might sort of want to take back and look at for their area, and we've got all that data. Nighttime economy, specific locations where there is a focus of higher numbers of reports around the nighttime economy, levels of reporting of particularly sexual violence. You can see there the levels of reporting. We've put considerable resource into that and changed some of the configuration of our teams, and we currently have the HMI with us this week looking at child protection in particular, which I know isn't quite the same issue, but the whole concept around vulnerability is pretty similar. And then mental health. If we'd done this report 6 years ago, we'd have been talking about 440 people who were detained under Section 136 of the Mental Health Act and taken to our cells. Those numbers are a remarkable change from that. That is because of considerable efforts, the efforts particularly perhaps of the triage car and the advice that they provide. And I'm very pleased to say that very few of them, hardly any of them actually, have been into our cells. From next week, it is against the law to take a mentally unwell child to a cell. which is something that I personally gave evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee about, because I just thought it was bizarre that that was regarded as acceptable. And then, in case you were getting too cheered up, Chair, the last page, particularly after Nottingham Forest's excellent win over Norwich, which I enjoyed watching very much, the money page at the end sort of describes where we currently are. We await the budget settlement next week, and what that tells you is total grant funding, how that is currently projected to look, what that might mean for council tax. And I would stress some of these are decisions that aren't mine to make and are still to be made, hence why they're particularly the council tax ones. And then, the impact along the bottom in terms of available officers. But, this panel will have ample opportunity, I'm sure, in coming meetings to talk about precept and things, and depending what the rules are around that. So, within this report, there is loads and loads of hard work. There's a constant feature and focus on trying to reduce harm. There's increasing complexity in the investigations we're doing, and a real thrust around vulnerability of particular victims.
Can you remember that?
Assistant Chief Constable Julia Debenham, she might well have done, because I think she did.
Yeah.
I think before the chief became the chief, and that was a bit of time ago anyway, I think she was Chief Inspector, I think, out at Melton.
Oh, was she?
I think she was. She was talking to me about this yesterday, actually.
Okay, yeah.
She didn't actually talk about the head that was found in Ashfordby.
Ashfordby.
Or there either. No.
Yeah.
Or there either. But I think you may have got the right one.
Right, lady. Right. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7. Number 1, point out there are recommendations at 1 and 2, but we'll come back to that at the finish. So I'm going to take each section as it comes, and I'm going to be quick because this report is 17 to 50, and I don't particularly want to be going back all the time. Okay, so we start off background on 17. It goes over to 18. National context on 18, going over to 19. Call handling received on 19, going over to 20, going over to 21, going over to 22, going over to 23. Emergency incident arrival times on 23, 24, 25.
I look at the figures, and obviously I'm very aware that some of this is around the new recording systems, etc., and there are spikes here that would be expected, and some of them, as you say, are part of police operations, for example, around possession of weapons. For yourself, Lord Bark, I look at that and go, OK, there's quite a challenge there now, isn't there, in terms of the policing crime plan around a potential refresh, looking at how do you look at this in terms of a strategic plan to look at how then to address some of these emerging areas of crime that's going up, for example, around acquisitive crime. Let me just touch on that. I asked the question last time, and I know there was some confusion, but certainly around offender management. I am concerned when I look at some of that acquisitive crime and some of the experience that I've had recently in terms of the links between the local probation and the police. Oh, look at Simon's face. In terms of that connectivity, I feel that there's something not working there at the moment, and it's having an impact on figures. And what are you looking to do in terms of your influence with those partners to ensure that we are managing these offenders correctly, that they're receiving the correct treatment if it's drug and alcohol, for example? The drivers for these crimes, that are meaning that these people are coming out. Some of these will be offenders known to you that are continuing to offend on release. And if it's short-term prison sentences that they're receiving, that actually when they come out of prison, there's no real monitoring of these people, and therefore they're back reoffending. I don't think I'm saying anything that's not of any great shock to anyone there. But there's something about that's not good enough, is it? Because actually it's affecting the police's performance. It's affecting residents and victims. And so for me, the question would be, what are you going to do regarding that particular issue? That's my first question. And in terms of looking at some of the other areas, I'm interested around the possession of weapons. Clearly there's been some work done. I think it would be good to have maybe some further, I won't be here, but for some more information regarding what kinds of weapons, what's the age profiling of these people, etc. Because actually, where are they getting the weapons from, etc., etc. Is it knives? Is it guns? Is it a mixture of things? And really looking at how you're going to tackle that with partners is another issue. And the last thing is around hate crime. I know that there's a particular spike in June, July time. I don't know, was there something, I can't, there's been so many incidents this year, and that's not me being flippant nationally. Was it something that happened nationally that had a spike in this area too that was reflected elsewhere? But certainly there's a question around that June, July time.
Can I deal with the first part, the probation issue you raise around whether the services are working as well as they might? IOM, of course, which I'm a convert to, I think does a fantastic job, but never underrate how restricted that is. Their number of IOM candidates, as they were, are particularly acute and fairly small number. And as I understand, the IOM system as it works pretty satisfactorily. That partnership works pretty well. I wish I could say the same for below IOM, as you say, short-term prisoners coming out, going back in, all the rest of it. Now, it's only anecdotal, but and I think you know this already, absolutely agree with your analysis. I think the changes that were made to the probation system have not been a success and aren't likely to be a great success in terms of short-term prisoners and what happens to them on release. A great deal of discussion has been taking place. I actually sat, I think, in this room when there was a scrutiny panel on the probation service here a few weeks ago, and I went to a YOS meeting again on this floor last week, take a particular interest in this. I think there have to be changes around probation. Obviously, I don't know what decision you've reached about my new chief executive, but I ought to say that this is his real place of expertise, and we've already had long discussions around what we might do in terms of the probation service. I have and I'm being quite open about this, quite high ambitions for the Police and Crime Commissioner or the OPCC to take a greater role in criminal justice generally, but in particular around the probation service, because I don't think the position is satisfactory either for those who work in that service, and I'm not forgetting them, who work in that service, or more importantly, for the wider community. So I do agree with your analysis. What to do about it, in the end, will be down to central government and whether they're going to stick with this particular process of having these two probation services, one of which it doesn't, it seemed to me at least, to be working as well as it should.
Sorry, Joe, just quickly, I mean, in recent months, I mean, you highlighted, the Melton meeting. I have shared with a couple of local MPs some case studies of individuals. I mean, one particular individual who resides in the fair borough of Melton, who we deal with quite regularly, we have convicted 165 times. Convicted 165 times. There does get a point in that where the police's role seems to have been done quite well, quite repeatedly. So we need to decide as a society what we're going to do with those people. The other 2 points, the weapons, then they're not guns, it's knives. It's predominantly knives. You will be aware at the start of the year through till kind of June, we had as many murders as we had in the previous year in effect. Lots of those were involving bladed articles, knives. We have done a big piece of work, and Kirk alluded to it earlier, working with partners, trying in effect to treat, there's a police bit and we've used knife arches and we've done some more stop and searches and we've tried to do that with communities. but also sort of treating knife crime as a public health issue, which has been an approach that has sort of worked elsewhere in the country, particularly in Scotland. So what we've been doing is identifying who are the people who we believe are carrying knives, what can we do between us as partners to kind of manage them away. Because the challenge is, if you've got a knife in your pocket, a stupid row that might otherwise be a push and shove, I'm afraid we've seen 2 or 3 times this year, has become a murder. And of course the other thing that is then going on, and I'd want to acknowledge the impact on victims' families. Yeah, absolutely, we get that. But you'll have seen the court results. Most of those people involved in those cases are either pending trial or they're currently sat in prison for long, long periods of time. So we're trying to do lots of work and be a bit joined up, as you described. And then the third point, hate crime. The most obvious explanation was the terrorist attacks that went on across the country. Whilst the uplift in reporting wasn't as big as the post-Brexit vote uplift the year before, the combination of Parsons Green, Westminster, Manchester led to an increase in reporting. We still believe hate crime is significantly underreported.
To the point Helen made, because I think it's a really crucial point. I'm more than happy to get an update on the knife crime kind of mapping and scoping of what's been done, and I'm obviously aware you won't be here, but I'm happy to send that paper on and bring the report back here if that's what you want.
Thank you, Chair. Following on to Helen's, first of all, thank you for this update on your quarter. On racial, if you see this increase, I know it's a national trend, we can say, and the religious one. Is it possible to see the gender? Is it more women who are the victim of this crime, hate crime? Or are they from BME communities? I mean, mostly women, when you see, they stop you on the streets and they mention about it, but they haven't reported. As a counselor, they stop me and then they say somebody called me. And is it a physical hate crime or is it verbal? So that will be helped to see, because Leicester, obviously the communities are working very well with the police, especially to see. And religious, is it on the places of worship or is the parents of the person, Because some of the places of worship have been they are not, what is the right word for place of worship? It's not, they are not victims, but there have been some incidents for that. And the next one is, about the calls. You said some of them are non-criminal. Many people, in a case of emergency, they don't know what to do. I'll give you an example. There's a great big power cut on Ross Walk. Upstairs in the community center, disabled lifts were not working. They were stuck. We didn't know what to do, and on the internet they found the electricity board. They said, ring the Western Power, and their number was 105, and nobody was picking up the phone. That line, so obviously they have to call 101. And the scary thing was, the volunteers bringing people on the wheelchairs down the stairs. It is not a safe way. So I rang even Andy Keeling. His phone, he was on holiday, Sunday, nobody picked up. So sometimes these sort of things, if 100 people in that community center, they call you out of panic because they need some assistance. So this is why then they don't have anywhere else to go.
Simon. I'll do
the hate crime is...
The hate crime issue, it's all the things you described, Manjula. Most of these are about people rather than places. We do have a huge breakdown of it, and we also have an independent scrutiny panel who looks at all of that data. So I am sure that you'd be very welcome to attend that and see what we do, but it does break it all down in exactly the way you described so that we can deal with trends of victimology. We do think it's hugely underreported. The point about the power cut, if my glass was half full, I would say, isn't it absolutely fantastic that we've got a police service who people think will come and help them? And if my glass was half empty, I would say that's a perfect illustration of something that we inherit, because frankly, there ain't nobody else who's going to inherit it. And so, it is a yin and a yang, and, I'm glad that we were trusted and believed in enough that we'd do something about it.
Could I just say a word on the first part? Just to say, I've been working reasonably closely now with the Criminology Department at the University of Leicester, who have an outstanding reputation as far as the study of hate crime is concerned. And I'm hoping that we'll develop a much closer relationship, of course, with all the universities in our area, all of whom are outstanding in this field. But the University of Leicester, Professor Chakrabarty and his team have a really good understanding, it seems to me, around hate crime, and have a lot to help us with.
Michael and then Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification on the burglary figures, please, Simon. Does that figure include shed crime? I know in the Harbour district, which is a very rural area, and we're getting an increase in rural crime, that they have amalgamated the shed crime with the house crime. Obviously, shed crime's annoying. You lose a lawnmower. Having someone invade your home is much more traumatic. So I think those figures, if they are amalgamated, could be separated, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, those are amalgamated. Burglary of the building would be sheds, buildings that aren't a dwelling. There's a sort of technical end to that, but it's absolutely what you're just describing. And burglary dwelling is, as you say, it remains a focus. It has increased over the past year, and we're working pretty hard on that. We can disaggregate the data in exactly that way. If you want to look at the data for your area, it all goes onto the police.uk website, and you could put postcodes in and just have a look and see, and that also shows you some outcomes as well. So, if we, in future, we can split that out, certainly.
Robert?
Lord Mark, I'd like to return to a question that I asked when your plan came out. And I asked how you were going to assess success. Given the rise in this chart of every area in crime, and I accept the fact that there's been a national increase, how are you going to know whether your police and crime plan has been successful or not?
Well, I'm not going to know within a year of it being published. I think is the first thing to say. I think I will be able to make, and more importantly, in a way, the panel and the outside world will be able to make a judgment a bit later on. I know you'd agree with me that to make any judgment about it, I think after 6-8 months, when there is a national increase in demand and in crime, would be foolish both ways. It may represent a failure, it may represent nothing of the kind. We don't know yet. But I will be looking, of course, really closely as I do, and with the scepticism I have about crime numbers anyway, I will be looking very carefully to see whether this progression of offending more and more crimes continues or doesn't continue, and whether it's continuing elsewhere or not continuing. I mean, I do think we've had some successes, I have to say, in terms of the way in which we treat the vulnerable. Sometimes we feel we have to do too much, but actually that is a really important thing to be doing and is absolutely central to the plan as much as anything else. We've got some important things to do around victims in the next few weeks and months, setting up a new scheme for them. So Robert, I will, if I may, sort of come back to you even if you aren't here anymore, in terms of whether it's a success or failure, but I suspect you'll come to me first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not actually trying to grind an axe here, because it's just that anyone looking at these figures on an initial inspection would think things are terrible, but they're not. And what I'm getting at is, how are you actually going to pin down, because you haven't set targets and various other things. How are you going to pin down and work out what is success, what constitutes success? Is it comparisons with other forces and how they're doing, or is it in overall numbers? It's really just to give a heads up on the fact that I think it's going to be jolly difficult for you to work out whether what you've asked the Chief Constable to do, he's been able to do or not.
I actually agree with you. I think it will be difficult, but I don't think there's a kind of simple formula that you can use. I think I'll know and others will know whether it's been a success or not at the right time. I'm afraid that's the best I can do at the moment.
Just to remind everyone, the whole principle of the PCC role is the electorate will take that decision in 2020. But you might not be there.
I won't be there, but let's hope it's more than 20% of the electorate. That would be a real success if we had more than 20% of the electorate actually voting. Then I would consider that in itself was something of an achievement. And that's why I spend so much of my time, and Kirk does as well, in engagement, in really just trying to get out, to get people to understand what this job involves and that it is an elected job.
Well, you certainly succeeded in getting a turnout in the city, so congratulations for that at the last election. Simon?
I think I asked for that, Chairman.
I mean, 2 points, if I may. I mean, one sort of, which doesn't answer Robert's question, but maybe does. You know, the difference between what the crime survey is saying, which is the official national statistic, and what is recorded, kind of highlights all the difficulties and complexities of the story. The other thing, of course, which were my cops in the room now, they would say 3/4 of what they'll be dealing with on Lates today won't be crime. And I went and worked Lates the other week with a shift, and I said to the cop I was with, I'll probably have a prisoner. I usually do. And she said, "Boss, you'll spend the whole afternoon with me looking for missing people and filling in vulnerability referrals." She was correct. So there's a real challenge about how do you judge the success of policing. Crime is kind of a fifth to a quarter of what we're doing. There's all this other stuff as well, which is really hard to capture, which is what the chart at the front of the paper is trying to sort of talk about, some of the other things and the other metrics, and it's tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the great news is that the public satisfaction figures remain extremely good, and that is really the answer to the question, or part of it, because if their people are happy with what you're doing, then you must be succeeding.
There was a bloke called Baggett, used to be Chief Constable, who would at this point deploy public confidence as our share price.
Moving on, page 26, total crime. Violence against a person, 27. Violence against a person with injury. Violence against a person without injury, 28. Theft of motor vehicle. Theft from motor vehicle, 29. Robbery person. Hate crime. Manjula? Yep, okay. My fault. I'm sorry. I apologise. Page 30, user satisfaction. Page 31, recorded incidents of antisocial behaviour.
I've worked out what the conversion rate means, which is from Storm to Sentinel. I'm not quite sure what it actually means in reality. I understand the percentages. How serious are the 2,253 Sentinel cases? Is that something to be concerned about, or is that a reasonable figure? They're figures in isolation. I'm not sure how seriously we should take it.
I know it's worrying, isn't it? Yeah. I think they might encourage you to ask two things. One is, if it goes on to Sentinel, it means it's being jointly managed because it's a case that is of high risk or seen of some significance locally. And Sentinel was created in the aftermath of the Pilkington case to ensure joint management and sharing of information. So what that data says is there's a different level of conversion between different areas, which I ask about, and given that these are jointly managed cases, you might want to just reassure yourself that for your area, the high-risk cases are being properly and appropriately managed in a shared way within the system. So it could reflect that different people are making slightly different risk judgments, but there is quite a sort of disparity, isn't there, between sort of 17-18% of cases being judged worthy of joint management and 3 and a bit % being judged. And I think that's the question. I'm not saying which is right or which is wrong. I would imagine within your CSP you've probably got some sort of probably annual or 6-monthly reporting back on this, and you've probably got a bit of dip sampling going on as well. So you might just want to reassure yourself of what those tell you, because they could all be absolutely right, but what's an average out of that? The average is about 10 or 11%, isn't it?
But I suppose the other question: how serious an issue? I mean, the 2253, is that a significant? Well, it seems a significant number, but is it a significant number? There is nothing to gauge it against. It's just a number. So I think some further work trying to explain that.
Yeah, I mean, we could the trend data. I mean, there isn't a sort of LLR-wide antisocial behaviour group that looks at all that stuff. But your point's well made. Is it doubled or halved or whatever? I mean, in general terms, the trend for antisocial behaviour has been downward in general terms in terms of over-reporting. But I don't know who represents you off the top of my head on that group, but it might be worth just checking with them because they can do the trend data. I mean, I guess the issue is that for individual districts or the city or wherever, are you happy that those cases are being proportionately and appropriately managed against the risk? I think that's a pretty normal kind of number, would be my sort of take on it. But it does mean there's over 2,000 people who we see at some risk of antisocial behaviour in a way that needs a concerted, which in a population of 1.1 million. Probably about right, but we've got all the trend data from within Sentinel.
Sorry, Chair, if I can on victims first. A question on victims first, if I may. Yeah, page 32. I seem to recollect almost withdrawing a question previously when you talked. Go back a bit. We were criticised as a force about victim support because the victim's first bit wasn't allowed to be inspected by HMIC. That's as I understand it. And clearly, therefore, we may well be providing the right victim support, but HMIC may not recognise it. That's a fair summation of where we were. Have we actually made some attempt to resolve that problem?
My sense is that the inspection model needs to mature around such issues, because whilst respecting the decision not to inspect a democratically elected person in the way that an organisation is inspected, there is a difficulty when you come to commission services. So I don't know that it's completely overcome. I mean, the other point, which I'll say it, but really probably for Willie to say really, is obviously we're currently also going through a recommissioning process for what victim services will be ahead.
Yeah, that Chief's absolutely right about that. The first contract is coming to a conclusion, and we're at the moment at the stage of choosing, about to choose a candidate to take victim support further. There will be. The specifications will be somewhat different from what they were last time, and there's some changes that I think are intended. But I'm afraid I'm slightly blindsided by the inspection point that you make. But I will try and come back to you on that, John. I think it's an important issue.
Okay, it's just that I suppose the logical thing is if you commissioned it via the police, then it's a police service and therefore it is inspectable and therefore, dare I say, if it's of then the quality that we thought it was, you've removed a problem.
Yeah, we've. I think we've been round that. I think we've been round that track. I think the Chief will know exactly what I mean when I say that. That's a debate that's been had, and it will be the OPCC who, as it were, will be making the decision around victim support.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually on the phone to Victim First last night for somebody that I support through the work I do. Very serious crimes were committed against this person, and just to give you an example, they're at risk at the moment in terms of vulnerability. The person that was the perpetrator has just been released yesterday, and in terms of the support that person's getting from the probation service, just to go make a point again, they didn't know there was any support for that person. So I've made the person aware of Victim First. They are getting support from Victim First. However, has been told there is a 2-week wait before they can see anybody, regarding the fact that they are at this moment in time feeling extremely vulnerable. I spoke at length with the senior caseworker last night, who I have to say I can compliment. She's doing her best to sort this out. The issue they seem to have, and I don't know if you're aware about this, Lord Back, is that because they are based in a police station, obviously, essentially in Leicester, the recruitment process is further delayed because of the checks that have to be done on the individuals coming in. Whether or not this is true, and that is obviously what was cascaded back to me last night because I asked the question as to why the delays. And I said I would raise it today. In terms of the fact, if there's anything can be done to expedite, because they're looking until February before they're going to have people in place to actually enable them to have the full staffing level to deal with it. So we've got a vulnerable person who's got a delay. They're trying to do the best for that person, but because of these other issues, it's not happening. So I just wanted to raise that as an example, but also what can you do to actually deal with these issues so that we can get them expedited for people?
Thank you very much for raising that issue. Actually, sitting in the public gallery now is the person in my office who is responsible for the new arrangements that will be made. But I can assure you that we will take that back with us today, and when we finish this, a phone call will be made to Victim First in the most clear terms that doesn't sound like any excuse for no action. And one would have thought, as they may be candidates for the new contract, they might react to that rather quickly.
And just to be clear, I'm not faulting anybody at the office. They were very, very good last night.
And that will be made clear too.
Yeah, thank you.
Page 33, continued development of volunteer roles within the force. 34, police staff volunteer leavers. Page 35, work towards the police force be reflective for the diverse communities of LLR. Rutland.
So my question is around 35. The last paragraph, the ranks. While we come a long way from 80s to now, I mean, we could hardly find BME's representative in the force by the number point of view. Looking at the stacks of 16 and 17, we haven't got any BME representative at the senior level ranks since Mr. Pandit left the force, and I think that is sad to see that kind of representations in that. We're in the modern eras, modern technology. Surely we have a good officers from BME background that could be promoted to the ranks. I can't going to make comments about education point of view. If they fail, then that's unfortunately sad thing. But I think we should see in the modern era more representations at the senior ranks.
think that's a very powerful point. The Chief and I talk about this a lot. I'm very pleased indeed the Chief's taken on board the goal group that he himself is chairing, which I attend. Going back to Colonel Martin's question, one of the tests for me will be that when I finish, how much we've achieved, both in this field, but also about overall numbers too. But it's a point well made.
Thank you, Clark. Thank you, Lord Bark. Any more on page 35, the rank breakdown? If not, we hop over to page...
Sorry, Chair, can I just say, can I do an advert? Leicestershire Police is recruiting now. It would be great if members of the panel went back to the communities that they are part of and represent and made that point, because one of the things we want to do is get our recruiting to be more similar in its proportion to the population that we serve. So now is a great opportunity. Recruiting ends the end of January, for constables particularly. And they are the people who will be a superintendent in 20 years.
Do you have a type of flyer you can ping out so we can send it to
all
our
online,
members?
Joe. Low on bureaucracy.
Okay, I'll track it down.
This could be your chance.
Yeah. I'm sure the good citizens of Melton Mowbray would like that. Yeah. Okay, we'll track it down, and Ewan can track it down, I'm sure, and then ping it out to all members of the panel. Thank you very much, Simon. Got that kind offer you maybe. It's got me a little bit confused. We're going over to 38, 39. We're still on the same column here, aren't we? 40, 41, 42. Here we are. Ensure new and innovative ways for public to provide information relating to crime and public safety. Page 43. Ensure the views of the public continue to be sought and reflected in the development of these new services. Page 44. Missing persons. Jonathan.
Sorry, under PCP 35, the table relating to engagement. Just really a question. Clearly, some good responses and some not so good responses. Just really wondering what effort or what can be done to actually bring some of those up. I mean, some of them are actually quite low figures to start with, but actually some of the engagements that were rated as good, clearly there's quite a big difference in particular one area compared to others.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about communities. Where's the best place to find them? Who do you want to talk to? I mean, Willie and Kirk both alluded earlier, we go and do the what matters to you thing. I'm not saying it's the answer to everything, but we turn up where people are at different times of day and evening in different locations. And, advantage of it, it's a bit random. Disadvantage, it's a bit random. So, what the teams are trying to do is look at communities, areas, where are they going to find people. I personally have a view that the sort of old style, the kind of old pace public meetings, at 7:30 of an evening, they struggle a bit in my view. We need to find other ways. We need to consciously be going out and looking, where are young people? I mean, what do the young people of Charnwood think about the services that they're getting? The obvious places to go there are the colleges and the universities, aren't they? So I think there's something about reinvigorating it, and I'm sure that these kind of numbers will help that process with my team.
Could I just bring this up to date slightly, if I could, Chair? Just as, it's anecdotal really. In the last month or so, I've been both at the school in Loughborough with Inspector Dwight Barker, and I had the pleasure of going to Barrow-on-Soar for a lively public meeting last week, again with Dwight Barker, both of which were actually meetings, particularly the one at Barrow, well worth holding.
Okay, thank you. So 44 missing persons, no more. 45. Total missing 10 or more repeat episodes. Page 46. Aha, tell Malise in here. Nighttime economy. That's his strength, that one. Page, I won't go any further than that. I'll leave you to your own interpretations. Page 47. Develop appropriate services to deliver an improvement in the investigation in the field of sexual violence. John?
Yes. I expected these numbers to rise because of the HMRC report. Have I misunderstood the fact that you were saying last time that in slavery cases where a person's been put into prostitution, then number of you're shaking and nodding. I presume you understand the question.
The numbers are relatively small. Therefore, within this data, yes, there have been some things that have been recorded as something else that have now been recorded as rapes, but the numbers are not huge. I mean, within the audit, there were 13 crimes that were subject of discussion around that. Well, if you put those into that, so it's not a huge number.
So if I make because the numbers, the huge numbers, globally they were quite large numbers, so presumably those numbers have come somewhere, and obviously we haven't picked them up.
I'm not sure I understand, sorry.
HMRC basically said you didn't record a significant number of crimes, or was it just incidents? I'm a little confused by what they were saying.
The crime data audit said there were 13 cases of rape that they felt we should have recorded that we hadn't.
Right. I thought there was far more cases of different crimes that they say we're underreported. So the question is, I thought this would be an area where it would show up. Clearly I was wrong. So where has it shown up?
I'm still not sure. I might be being slow. I might have peaked.
Right.
The chart on page 25.
Right. Okay. No. HMRC basically said you under-recorded crime. So presumably you've put that back and put that correct. Therefore, where's it showing up? Or was HMRC actually not saying something that made sense?
I think the answer is the chart on page 25, which shows significant increases in recording of all sorts of different crimes. Obviously, this part of the plan is around sexual violence and
So basically, page 25, all of those increases are down to what HMRC said you needed to change in terms of reporting, but crime overall hasn't really risen. I'm confused what you've failed to report previously. I'm confused with what we're being given against what HMRC said was wrong previously, and I'm confused. There's no agenda beyond my confusion.
Well, thank you for sharing your confusion with me as well. Thank you.
My confusion is John keeps talking about HMRC, of course. Now they do have more powers, of course, than the police, but it is I see. Yeah.
What HMIC FRS said was that their view was that if the rest of our crimes were audited to the standard of the dip sample of 1,800 phone calls that they did, that they felt there was under-recording in the region of 20-odd thousand. What we are finding at the moment, and to answer your original question, there are things that we are now recording differently that were still within our other systems before, that you see on particularly page 25, and you see there the increases. But there are also some crime types that we believe there are more of happening. So, for instance, there are more burglaries. And burglary is an offence that's sort of 95% reported typically. Theft from motor vehicle has increased. In some of the other areas, I think it reflects what you said, which is a kind of more nuanced, which is I'm not sure there's more things happening, but there are more things being recorded. And you can see within, on page 25, so for instance, rape, where you've got there are more people coming forward to report rape, partly because we have been campaigning, seeking more people to come forward, because we believe it's hugely underreported. It might be prudent if we shared with Ewan the link to All Is Not Lost, which is 2 quite short films about rape that we have been running, rather as previously we ran the Kaylee Haywood video. So I think there are some crime types that have gone up. There is definitely more crime being recorded by us as a crime following on the audit process. But I don't know, so there's a bit of this which is really technical, and there's a bit of this which is there are some things that have increased. And bike theft's gone down. Let's not lose the sight of the fact that bike theft's gone down.
Could I just say a word? I think the harassment figure on page 25 is an example of where, as a result of the HMIC report, the figure has gone up appreciably. And could reference was made to the film around rape. I strongly recommend, if I may, I just suggest you, Chair, rather than strongly recommend, I think it'd be excellent for the panel, perhaps as a whole, to see what are 2 quite shocking but very, very important and impressive short films around the subject of rape, which is something that's very much like I think the Kaylee Haywood film shows the Leicestershire force at its very, very best and its most original. I do think the panel, I was thinking this the other day, really ought to have a chance to see these films so you can make a judgment about them yourselves, because they're an important part of what the force is doing at the moment. I'm rather using the fact they were mentioned in passing to make this plea that the panel should look at them.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably my last ever comment at a Voice in Crime panel. Around the rape side of things, in terms of victim reassurance of support throughout the whole process, I would just like to raise an issue which kind of links to what I've just been talking about, around the subsequent release of offenders and the support that needs to be given to people, because if we want more people to report the crime, they need to know, particularly looking at the last paragraph there on page 47 or 31, depending which you look at, about the fact that the person's known to them, that on the release of those offenders, that the person who has reported the crime is given the same level of support that they received prior to conviction, because that is my issue right now that I'm dealing with for somebody, and it's not there. So I think we need to be reassuring the public that if they're going to report something throughout the whole process, and I mean the whole process, that there is going to be a level of assurance. And for you as a Police and Crime Commissioner, I really welcome anything you can do to make sure that that is escalated and that the right support is given to people throughout the whole process, including pending release and release.
Any more on page 47? Develop appropriate services to deliver. Turning over page 48. Actively adopt approaches to prevent the mentally unwell from being in a custody environment. Page 49. We have the figures, graph, whatever. Anything on that? Jonathan. Oh, John. It's very difficult without my trusty.
I suspect we're about to ask the same question. The bottom right-hand corner, which is always the place to look in any balance sheet, it does indicate the reduction in officers to 1,610. Do you think that is that a desired figure, or is that frankly where you think the figure will end up?
I think both Chief and I want to say a quick word about that. It is certainly not the desired figure, absolutely not, but it is the realistic figure which has been based on the proposition that we get nothing more, either in terms of funding or in freedom in terms of precept. That is a likely consequence of the present funding continuing. So it's very much not wanted. I think I've made it clear that I want to keep the police numbers up as much as it is possible to do so. I don't know what the Chief would like to.
Well, I feel slightly careless because when I arrived there were 2,300 police officers. It's not impossible that figure has to go down because of other cost pressures. So, for instance, the recent exciting breaking of the public services pay cap to give police officers 2%, only 1% of that is funded. So the other 1% is another £750,000. So, that figure, as ever with these things, this is a projection based on what we know. I think that figure will probably be adjusted downwards the next run of this that we have. It is not a figure that we desire. And it obviously presents real challenges about what we can be expected to do and deliver. And, Manjula's produced a beautiful example earlier, actually, should we be resourcing the fact that there's been a power cut? Discuss. It's a really sort of sobering example. So I think the other thing just to say, some of these projections will change a bit according to how we use our reserves. We do not have big reserves by comparison to the majority of forces in the country. And we have a plan which means by about 2021 we'll be down to about £6 million worth of reserves, and some of our maintenance of police officer and staff numbers over the next couple of years is because the PCC has released some funding from reserves. So given that population is growing and Leicester's a very popular place to live and work and it grows quicker than many other places, we have some challenges here, and it isn't a desire, no. And within saying that, my job is to maximise the money that we get, just as yours is for your council. We need to maximise it. We need to use technology. We need to automate what we can. We need to be really clever in what we do and how we do it. But there is a sort of challenge, which is, in the last few months and since I last came to this panel, we've gone to critical twice. Going to critical and patrolling all the key points, whatever, is more challenging when you've got 500 fewer people and 1 million less deployable hours a year available to you than it is if you've got them.
Remember in 2010, Simon, the police authority had a committee to decide where to put the surplus cash. Which bank? Yep. Which was the 3-star bank to put it in?
As long as it wasn't the Icelandic one, as I recollect that discussion. Yeah.
Rutland.
Sorry, Chair. It's not a question, it's just comments. I'd like to congratulate on the saving that you're going to achieve over the next 4 years, which is substantial, looking at the figures. So I just want to congratulate you on that figures.
Thank you very much for that, Rutland, but I very much hope we won't have to make those savings, because they will be at a very costly price if we do have to. That's, I think, we're all agreed on.
Okay, members. Yep. Oh, Jonathan, I thought you were...
Actually, I'm not asking the same question. So unique question. I mean, figures. Looking at tables of figures is always fascinating to actually just sort of more than anything else to actually see what people include rather than actually what they don't include as far as targets or what are felt to be representative figures. I mean, I'm sure there's a story behind the ones that you've decided to include, and these are no doubt the ones that are going to be used for tracking on the basis of the part of the performance data. And it's quite interesting actually looking at them. I mean, they sort of tell a picture in their own right over a sort of 10-year period. Grant funding reduced by 34 million. I mean, obviously this is a 12-year period that's actually shown here, but roughly looking from 2010 onwards from when it starts. Savings achieved, probably about 72 million, 73 million. Council tax Band D up by about 17%. Population increase probably slightly less than 10% or thereabouts. And obviously officer numbers changed as well. I mean, it'd be interesting to actually probably get a feeling for more figures than this, but obviously these are your figures rather than actually our figures as a panel. So, for instance, it'd be interesting to see total income from Precept, because obviously that's, at the moment, the amount coming from Precept's actually outstripped population, so I'm assuming that means more houses, therefore actually the Precept increase is actually calculated more, because actually there were more people paying Band D council taxes, etc. Total headcount would be interesting always, to actually, because officers are obviously one segment, but total headcount would be useful to know, full-time equivalents particularly, and also what the total budget for the force is, rather than actually just what the grant Precept, because the Precept at the moment is only judged by a percentage, it's not actually as a total sum, so it'd be interesting to actually know what that is. And again, likewise, it'd be interesting in that case to find what the head, so the pound per head of population. At the moment, I can't quite, in my mind, get how this works, because savings outstrip funding reductions from grant. Precepts actually outstrip population increase. So again, it doesn't seem to tally. And actually more figures would probably explain why it should do.
I mean, the presentation here actually, the data that's here was because that's data we've been using in public meetings, really, to say, because these have sort of reflected what the public have asked. Just a reassurance, the next meeting will be the budget meeting, will it be? Yeah? You and Nod Sagely, you will get enough. Oh, you're going to miss a treat, Jonathan, there. All of those questions will be answered. And it talks through all of those issues in terms of relative income, expenditure, all the categories you just described, as you would probably expect. Yeah. So to be honest, it's my fault it's there, because it just seemed a bit strange to me that we got a meeting of this significance between the budget and what we actually get as a Precept settlement, and money wasn't being mentioned anyway.
As I said, I mean, it's always interesting to see what people use for performance. How are we performing over a period of time? And I think it's always good to actually pick the right figures rather than necessarily just some figures. And I guess it's up to you to decide what are the best or most representative figures for the police to actually paint the picture of genuinely how it's performing and how the income's coming in, et cetera, et cetera. It's for you to actually present the figures.
Okay, I'll charge you again. We will do our best to remember, Jonathan, to make sure you get that paper at the end of January. Are there any other questions on page 49? If not, we move over to the recommendation, which I presume is to note the reports, but I can't quite remember. It's on page 17. Recommendations at 1 and 2 to note the report, to identify local actions for their community safety partnerships to carry out to ensure effective call management, appropriate demand management. Is everyone happy with those recommendations? John?
I'm sorry, Chair. This goes back right to the start of this panel. It's my view this is a scrutiny panel. This is not a delivery panel. And in my view, the panel identified local actions is actually incorrect. The Community Safety Partnership quite rightly should identify those issues, not this panel. This panel's job is to scrutinise that those issues have been done. Otherwise, we end up in a very strange situation where we're trying to scrutinise a performance basis that we are part of, and I think that is wrong.
So you are recommending recommendation 2?
No, I'm asking that recommendation is taken to the Community Safety Partnership for them to action. It's not for us to action.
Over to you, Ewan.
So, police and crime panels have responsibility for dealing with complaints against the Police and Crime Commissioner. When this panel was set up in 2012, a decision was made to delegate that responsibility to the panel's monitoring officer, who is the Director of Law and Governance here at the County Council. Just to point out that if the complaint against the Police and Crime Commissioner has a criminal element, then the panel has a duty to refer that to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. So, over the past year, there have been 2 complaints against the current Police and Crime Commissioner, which are set out in your report. Neither of those had a criminal element, so they were dealt with locally by the monitoring officer, and those complaints have been resolved. So they were the only issues that arose. So all we're asking you to do is note the contents of the report and consider how often you'd like to receive a report on complaints against the Police and Crime Commissioner. Possible suggestion on an annual basis to continue with that, if we're all happy.
I think I'll echo annual basis if there is any.
Any other comment?
Chair.
I keep forgetting that.
Chair, sorry. It seems to me appropriate that we record our thanks to the to independent members who will not be attending in future, or at least not in their current guise. I've no idea what Lord Back knows about that. Basically, I just feel that it only appropriate we put our thanks on paper.
Okay, what I've got here, John, is this. Next meeting of the panel is scheduled to take place on the 31st of January 2018. As this is the last meeting... As this is the last meeting of our independent panel members, Robert Martin and Helen Carter, I'm sure you will all join me in saying thank you to them for their contribution over the last 5 years. Just to remind you all, shortlisting has taken place for the new independent panel members, and interviews are taking place this Friday, so we are hoping to have new members in place for the meeting on the 31st of January. I'd just like to add to that, genuinely, from myself and all the panel, thank you very, very much. You will both be missed, there's no doubt about that. And you've got new challenges ahead of you both. Helen's already given me one as a local councillor today. So, Lord Bark.
Could I, on behalf of the OPCC, and I'm sure on behalf of the force as well, just echo what you've said, Chair. My predecessor and I both faced questions from Robert and Helen over quite a period now. They've always been extremely pleasantly put, even though they've been pretty sharp questions. And that's the whole purpose, actually, of this panel and how you hold me and the officer holder to account. So I'd like to thank them very warmly on behalf of, as I say, the OPCC.
Best of luck, and I'm sure every meeting you'll be watching the Red Broadcaster recording one scene, say we've gone wrong.
I wouldn't guarantee it.
No. Rationale.
Thank you, John. On behalf of all the city councillors, I'd like to echo Helen and Robert on the new role and wish them all the luck.
All comments have been recorded, so thank you very much. So it all just remains for me to say, really sad to say this because another year's gone by, but Merry Christmas. Yeah. I know. Ho, ho, ho. And a healthy new year. So we'll see you on January 31st. And importantly, a safe trip home. Thank you very much.